There is a specific kind of woman who believes rules are not meant to protect people, but to discipline them. She believes authority lives in her voice, that silence means agreement, and that fear is the same thing as respect. For a long time, I let one of those women believe she had power over me. I watched her grow bolder with every person who looked away, until the morning she crossed a line that could not be rewritten, reinterpreted, or quietly ignored. That morning did not end the way she expected. Have you ever encountered someone like that in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's see how far these HOA dramas and clashes of authority really reach. My name is Hannah Cole, and I live in a neighborhood that worships order the way other places worship freedom. At first glance, it looks serene, almost comforting. Lawns are trimmed to the exact same height, as if measured with rulers. Houses were only approved shades, colors chosen long before the current residents arrived. Mailboxes stand in perfect formation, identical and evenly spaced, like they're waiting for inspection. Even the trees seem disciplined, branches pruned into shapes that don't dare reach too far. People smile when they pass each other, but the smiles are brief, cautious, and rarely reach their eyes. When my husband, Mark, and I moved in, I mistook that quiet for peace. I thought it meant safety, predictability, a place where nothing bad could happen because everything was so carefully controlled. It took me longer than I cared to admit to realize that what I was feeling wasn't calm at all. It was pressure, the kind that builds when you know you're being watched, measured, evaluated, even when no one is standing directly in front of you. This wasn't a neighborhood built on trust, it was built on surveillance, disguised as harmony. I noticed Victoria Ames almost immediately. Some people enter a room and take up space without saying a word. Victoria did that effortlessly. She stood straighter than everyone else, chin slightly raised, shoulders set with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and didn't expect to start now. When she spoke, her voice carried an assumption of agreement, as if obedience were the natural response and dissent a personal flaw. She didn't introduce herself by name, she introduced herself by title, President of the Homeowners Association. The words landed with weight. It wasn't just information, it was a declaration, a warning, and a promise wrapped together, delivered with a polite smile that felt anything but welcoming. From the very beginning, Victoria made it clear she didn't like me. Not in a way that could be openly challenged, not at first. It started subtly, with small inconveniences that were easy to explain away if you wanted to believe the best in people. Before Mark and I were married, I would sometimes be delayed at the gate when visiting him. Suddenly there were forms that hadn't existed before, requests for additional verification, procedures that seemed to apply only when my name was involved. The guards always looked uncomfortable. They avoided eye contact, followed instructions, and apologized without apologizing. Victoria, on the other hand, watched it all with a faint smile, as if she were observing an experiment. She called it protocol. I recognized it for what it was, a test, a way to see how much inconvenience I would tolerate without pushing back. I told myself it would stop once I officially lived there, once I was no longer a visitor, once I belonged. That belief was comforting and completely wrong. The moment Mark and I got married, the tone shifted. It was immediate and unmistakable. Notices began appearing in our mailbox with unsettling regularity. They were written in stiff, formal language, the kind designed to sound objective while delivering something deeply personal. Our trash bins were cited for being inches out of alignment. Our grass was described as visually inconsistent with community standards. A wreath on our front door was deemed seasonally inappropriate, even though identical ones hung on other doors without consequence. Every notice came with a fine. Every fine came with a deadline. Every deadline carried an implied threat. The message was clear: comply or be punished, publicly and repeatedly. Neighbors began offering quiet apologies, usually when Victoria wasn't nearby. They spoke in lowered voices, glancing around as if the walls might hear them. Conversations felt conspiratorial, like we were discussing an illness no one wanted to catch. No one defended us openly. No one challenged the notices. Everyone understood the unspoken rule. Victoria loved examples, and examples were meant to hurt enough that others stayed in line. I tried a different approach. I chose kindness. I greeted her when I saw her. I smiled. I complimented her landscaping, her flower beds, her dedication to the community. She listened without warmth, eyes cold and calculating. Days later, updated guidelines would appear in inboxes and mailboxes. New rules, clarifications, revisions. Somehow they were always retroactive, and they always pointed back to us. That was when the truth settled in. This was never about maintaining standards or protecting the neighborhood's image. It was about dominance, about reminding everyone, especially me, who decided what was acceptable and who didn't get a say. I stopped reacting emotionally. I stopped trying to win her over. Instead, I watched. I saved every email. I took photos of our property and others like it. I logged dates, times, language, patterns. I paid attention to how Victoria escalated pressure, how she chose her targets, how she relied on embarrassment and isolation to keep people compliant. She assumed I would eventually apologize, pay the fines, and fade quietly into obedience. She mistook my patience for surrender. The HOA meeting that followed didn't feel like a discussion. It felt like a performance staged for a very specific audience. The chairs were arranged too neatly, the agenda too polished, the pauses too deliberate. Victoria stood at the podium with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every word alone in her living room, perfecting not just the speech, but the timing of her silences. Her gaze swept slowly across the room, grazing faces without really seeing them, until it found me. When her eyes stopped, they lingered just long enough to leave no doubt about who this was for. She began speaking about moral decline, her voice measured and controlled, as if she were delivering an unpleasant truth rather than a personal accusation. She talked about community standards under threat from modern attitudes, about the erosion of values that once kept the neighborhood respectable. Her language was vague by design, flexible enough to avoid accountability and sharp enough to wound. She spoke of indecent presentation, of disrespect toward leadership, of the need to protect families from inappropriate influence. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Her eyes kept returning to me, again and again, like a finger pointing without moving. People shifted in their seats. A few glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away. Silence thickened the room. Victoria promised stricter enforcement, more monitoring, clear consequences, penalties severe enough, she said, to restore respect. Some board members nodded automatically, their expressions blank. Others stared down at the table, suddenly fascinated by their notes. Fear moved through the room quietly, the way it always does, passed from one person to another without a word. Victoria had spent years cultivating it, watering it carefully, rewarding it when it behaved. When she finished, the room felt smaller. I raised my hand and asked a simple question. I wanted to see the written rule defining indecency, the exact wording, the standard being enforced. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said leadership required flexibility, adaptability, judgment. In that moment, I understood exactly what she meant. Flexibility was power without boundaries. It was the freedom to decide after the fact who was wrong and how much they would suffer for it. The next morning, I went for my run as usual. Same route, same pace, same early air that still carried a hint of coolness before the day heated up. I wore what I had worn dozens of times before: leggings, a sports bra, headphones, nothing provocative, nothing unlawful, nothing that hadn't already existed quietly in this neighborhood for years. By midday, the email arrived. A formal notice, a violation, a fine for $2,000. The reason listed was indecent exposure. I read it once, then again. I felt a flicker of disbelief, then something colder. I didn't respond. We didn't argue. We didn't explain. Another fine arrived the next day, then two more, then one early in the morning and one late at night, spaced just far enough apart to feel deliberate. Victoria was stacking penalties like trophies, testing limits, testing patience, measuring how much pressure it would take before we cracked. We paid nothing. Instead, we documented everything: screenshots, timestamps, emails, patterns. Silence became our response, and that silence unsettled her. Her behavior changed almost immediately. Her car began appearing near our house at odd hours. She lingered longer than necessary. She patrolled the street with a new intensity, scanning, watching, waiting for a reaction. The pleasant smiles vanished, replaced by irritation she could no longer fully conceal. Anger sat just beneath the surface now, close enough to show. Friday morning, I was stretching near the sidewalk, warming up before my run, when she emerged from her car. She moved with purpose, clipboard clutched tightly, as if it were proof of her authority. She stepped directly into my path, blocking me without hesitation. Her voice rose, intentionally loud, designed to draw attention. She demanded payment, accused me of disrespect, spoke about consequences in vague terms. I told her calmly that I had broken no rule. That statement, delivered without fear or apology, broke something in her. She stepped closer, invading my space. She claimed HOA authority to enforce compliance directly. Then she reached toward my clothing, as if correcting a mistake she believed she had the right to fix. The street went silent. For a moment I laughed, more out of shock than humor. Then she grabbed fabric. Instinct took over. I pushed her back to create space, controlled but firm. She stumbled and humiliation ignited into rage. She lunged forward, swinging wildly, shouting threats she could no longer shape into words. I defended myself, precisely, efficiently, enough to end it. She fell hard, screaming loud enough to pull neighbors from their houses. Phones appeared in hands. Cameras rose. Multiple angles captured everything as the illusion of authority finally shattered in public. Security arrived to a scene that had already slipped beyond anyone's control. Voices overlapped from every direction, neighbors talking at once, some angry, some shaken, some still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Victoria's voice cut through all of it, sharp and commanding, demanding attention the way it always had. She pointed at me, shouting for my arrest, invoking authority as if the word itself should still bend people to her will. She spoke about assault, about violations, about consequences, her sentences tumbling over each other as she tried to seize back control through sheer force of sound. But control was already gone. Phones were raised openly now, no longer hidden or tentative. Screens glowed in the morning light. Someone replayed the footage aloud, and the sound of it drew others closer. Another angle appeared, then another. The videos passed from hand to hand, not with excitement, but with a strange, collective focus. No commentary was needed. Frame by frame, the truth unfolded on repeat. Victoria stepping forward, her hand reaching out, fingers closing on fabric. The sudden escalation from accusation to physical contact. With every replay, something fundamental drained from her expression. It wasn't anger or embarrassment, it was certainty, the quiet, unshakable belief that she would always be believed, always be obeyed, always be protected by her position. That belief had sustained her for years. Now it dissolved in real time, witnessed by people who had once lowered their eyes when she spoke. Victoria's power had never lived in rules. It lived in silence, in hesitation, in the assumption that no one would challenge her publicly. Now the silence was gone, replaced by evidence that refused to be ignored. She didn't retreat, she erupted. That evening, emails flooded inboxes across the neighborhood. Long messages arrived in rapid succession, each more frantic than the last. She accused me of assault, of defamation, of intentionally undermining community morals. She claimed there was a coordinated effort to destroy her reputation. She invoked conspiracies, vendettas, imagined alliances. Threats followed quickly, lawsuits, restraining orders, criminal complaints. She wrote as if speed itself could overwhelm reason, as if volume could still substitute for truth. What Victoria failed to understand was that every message only made the picture clearer. Residents began comparing emails, timestamps, language patterns. Screenshots were shared quietly at first, then openly. People recognized phrases they had once seen before, accusations they had once believed were isolated incidents. Patterns emerged that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. By morning, the hearing was already in motion. It was scheduled quickly, accelerated by the sheer amount of material submitted. Videos, emails, written statements, old notices pulled from folders and inboxes. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many people finally willing to say the same thing. This wasn't new, and it wasn't just me. Victoria arrived dressed for confrontation. Her clothes were immaculate, chosen to project authority and professionalism. Her posture was rigid, her movement sharp, as if she were stepping onto a stage she still believed belonged to her. She looked around the room, searching for lowered gazes, for discomfort she could exploit. She didn't find it. I arrived quietly, calm, grounded. Neighbors sat near me, not whispering this time, not avoiding eye contact. Some offered small nods, others simply stayed close, their presence a silent statement of support. Victoria insisted on speaking first. She launched into a speech that was meant to dominate the room, but as minutes passed, the structure of her argument began to collapse. She contradicted her own emails without realizing it. She cited bylaws that didn't exist, then revised them mid-sentence when challenged. She blamed technology for the videos, questioned timestamps, suggested manipulation, even as the footage played again on a large screen. This time, the clips were slowed, zoomed in, paused at key moments. Her reach, her grip, the escalation she could no longer explain away. Each attempt to regain control only highlighted the gap between her version of events and what everyone could see with their own eyes. Board members shifted in their seats. The mediator interrupted more than once, not to argue, but to slow her down, to restore order she was rapidly losing. Panic crept into her voice, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Her authority fractured under scrutiny, piece by piece. When it was my turn, I spoke briefly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't speculate about motives. I laid out a timeline. Dates, times, actions, evidence. Boundaries clearly stated. The contrast between us did more than any accusation ever could. The decision followed quickly. Her claims were dismissed outright. Her actions were formally classified as harassment, abuse of authority, and physical misconduct. Every fine issued against us was voided. Financial damages were ordered. Mandatory anger management was imposed. And then came the final determination: immediate resignation, pending a full ethics review. Victoria stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly across the floor. She shouted about conspiracies, about betrayal, about people who would regret this. Her words echoed, but they no longer commanded attention. No one interrupted. No one reacted. She stormed out, heels striking the floor with sharp, hollow sounds. No one followed. No one looked away. What remained wasn't fear or triumph. It was something quieter, the sudden absence of pressure. The realization that power built on intimidation collapses the moment it's forced into the light.
Life adjusted faster than expected. The HOA issued public apologies. Rules were rewritten transparently. Elections opened. I returned to my morning runs without being watched, greeted instead with quiet smiles and nods of respect. Victoria's name became a cautionary reference, spoken softly in meetings, a reminder that power sustained by fear collapses the moment silence ends. Justice didn't shout. It documented, replayed, and concluded. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more HOA tales, intrigue, and investigations. Here, we break down the drama behind closed gates, uncover hidden conflicts, and follow every twist in this suburban saga. Don't miss the next chapter in HOA Showdowns. Hit the bell and stay tuned.